All right, good day, brothers and sisters in Christ. I wanted to rein in the new year with a kind of unique video. I have been running a trend of basically doing rather shorter videos around Bible studies, things that I have been reading about and I want to talk about. But I wanted to address a specific topic that's been on my mind lately, and that's how I even got to get back into church, to put it simply. And what I really mean by that is, what could churches, pastors, whatever position you might be, do right now to attract, um, young adults, specifically young men like myself, to go back or to discover for the very first time or to reignite the flame, however you really like to call it. Um, their calling for Christianity and what their role is. So I just wanted to address things that were maybe personal to me and kind of open up a broader conversation around this. And the first thing would be kind of addressing the why behind it. And I think it's put really well. I've heard this from a previous pastor before, and he says, you're not going to beat someone in the physical, in the carnal. It's going to be, in a sense, beating in the spiritual and not actually like beating, but really like winning a race. You're not going to win the race in terms of wealth, power, prestige, even, relationships and relationship capital, what have you. It's more built in the spiritual and it's kind of that spiritual capital. That's where the true win happens with Christianity. And, I started university personally at a very young age, of the age of 14. And, you know, being young, probably far too naive and very susceptible to the doctrines that were kind of uh, under the hood, if you will. It was very implicit of what they were saying. It seeks to question a lot, and specifically that of religion, right? And so some of the examples that were coming to my mind was, I was raised Christian. I was raised actually Methodist, but nevertheless, it was, why should I believe something from a Jew who was over 2,000 years back? Right? Like that's a fair question, I thought, in my mind. Um, and like, how can I take principles from a Middle Eastern culture and how does that apply to me now? And how can you call a singular book, that was compiled over centuries, written in different, basically scripts throughout, millennia, and calling that the word, right? Like that, it seems very, self-focused and self-centered, and all these, really interesting and intriguing questions that I think a lot of other young men might have, whether they're in the faith right now and, half, Christian, they call them Christian, but not actually practicing it. In addition, those who are considering, um, and these are, quite logical questions because, I'm not, Jewish, and, like I don't have the ethnic background to correspond to a specific culture. And I looked at it from a very, physical type of cultural viewpoint and not really, any kind of spiritual, which is a completely different dimension that Christians try to live in. It's something that you can't see. And to that point, winning this kind of war, right? So, like the devil's got a very interesting game. He's called the accuser for a reason, and I often refer to him as just that because he will make an accusation. Well, none of this is real, and like, what better trick to play um, than, hey, I'm not real. None of this is real. Question yourself out of belief, and then he can really start working his way into your mind, and that's how. And I think there's a lot of historical perspectives behind this as well. A lot of societies who were maybe strong in religion and then they, questioned their way out of it and then they started taking atheist approaches and things of unbelief and then suddenly, they're, committing atrocities, they're, committing sin basically at a mass level, this kind of degeneracy that we see. And this is all to say what the problem is, right? Like the solution is if you're a pastor, for instance, listening to this video, you just so happen to stumble upon it, the why. Like a lot of people talk about the what in sermons, and I think that's great. You need to address the what. Everyone needs to hear the truth. But talking specifically about the why and why is it even important to get into the spiritual in the first place? And obviously, this is a constant discovery for myself, certainly, like, a baby in the faith. This is not like an incredibly mature viewpoint, but it's a question that you need to address. Otherwise, you're losing a large, market share because there's going to be people who just believe on face value and they have that childlike faith that's often talked about in the Bible, but there's also going to be those who are, just have a mind for questioning. So those are kind of examples that you want to address, like the questions I brought up, the aforementioned points, address those. Like, don't quell the questioning, you know, stimulate it because more of those questions that need to be brought out and the Bible is sufficient in itself. So like all of those questions can be answered. And I have found the answers and I talk about the answers sometimes in my own Bible studies and when I post them, on online. So addressing the why. Secondly, obviously beyond that, creating fellowship, especially among young adults. And in particular, one thing that I've seen done well in a few instances, and I say a few because it's not as common, is the kind of mentorship that, older men mentor younger men. And I know the church has gotten this really, especially the Catholic church has gotten this terrible like rap in a sense of really awful things that have been done that need not be said. And it's really unfortunate because it kind of, it obviously taints you know, the fellowship that's needed and honestly the mentorship. Mentorship should happen at every single level. I'm a firm believer that, an older man who has been with the faith for a while, who, leads a family successfully, should be mentoring a younger man who's looking and aspiring to raise a family of his own, maybe looking to find a woman. And even before that, getting ready and getting the proper mindset, because a lot of young men don't have that. There's probably a plethora of statistics out there where you could point to, divorce rates, single moms raising young boys, and just how devastating that can be for their mental health. This whole feminist movement that's, really just gotten out of hand in so many ways. And I'm talking about in an extreme fashion. Um, and all of these things that are really worldly have culminated, and it's not so much the church's fault for those things, but in a sense, you need to have that mentorship and you need to have the fellowship, like basically, I'm 23 years old as a man and I need to be around other, young adults and I need to have mentorship. And I have personally found mentorship from, someone who has raised a family and he gives me mentorship. And, there's going to come a time where I need to mentor someone else who's also new to the faith. That's kind of like this term of evangelical evangelizing. That's all it is. Like this isn't fancy stuff. Like this need not be blown out of proportion. That's as simple as need, it needs to get. So that's my recommendation. Secondly, creating, fellowship and especially mentorship. And thirdly and finally, just to wrap this up and keep it brief, um, it's really driving action. And I mean that in the sense of like community service, service in the church, getting into small groups, like diving into the word, talking about real life things, basically living out the faith. Because, a young man is easily distracted these days through a lot of social media that's really antisocial in nature. It's creating men to be very antisocial and have this enormous fear of rejection. Um, so I want to bring this up because you go to one sermon on a Sunday, you're gonna forget it, soon after because you're just bombarded with other information. And having that kind of accountability, that's the real magic behind it. And I'm saying magic in a joking sense here, because there is no mystic to this. This is once again simple stuff. And at any level of a church. I don't care if like it's at a congregation of 10 or you got 10,000. I think this can be played out. And obviously there's scalability to this and there's different ways that it can take place, but hey, if you got like two guys that are in the range of 20 to 30 and they're only two guys so far in your congregation, then my recommendation would be like get them in a room, like just force them to talk for 15 minutes. They're probably going to get along on some level, right? And they're going to talk, and that kind of just men talking amongst men is so important because they need to see that their struggles aren't the only ones in this whole um, antisocial behavior that's coming on is not our fault. And it's easy to point the blame on someone who could be basically, I don't want to call it a victim, um, but it's easy to say, well, they have all these problems because they're doing all these actions, but like if that's all they know and that's their source of, really trying to get out of themselves and get out of this trap that they feel in that's really been set by the accuser, talking in a spiritual sense here, that needs to be addressed. So just to recap, address the why, talk on spiritual benefits, don't just talk on the what, start with the why. Creating fellowship, especially mentorship, and then just, leading with actionable steps. And this is purely from a standpoint of a 23-year-old male who is just, starting to scratch the surface. But I think this message needs to be said because I think we're like this target market that doesn't get a lot of attention. And I think, and this might sound sexist, but I think I mean, I don't frankly care. It's more attractive for women these days because this idea of being born again and you can make mistakes in college and then you get back on the straight and narrow path and all these things that's very attractive to women and men are kind of just like left in the corner and like, well, you need to do this and this and you need to be a better man and all this kind of stuff, and that's not what Christianity is about. It's not about being this perfect person. It's not about being better. It's about grace and it's about being forgiven. It's about giving yourself up, taking up your cross, living in the spiritual. I mean, all these things that we always talk about and hear about in a sermon, but those are the ways that I think uh, a person who's truly trying to grow their audience and want to target a demographic like myself should be talking upon. So this is my perspective. This is simply just an opinion. Everyone's got an opinion, especially when it comes to social media. So take it for what it's worth. And hopefully, I really do pray that you get something out of this. Maybe you're a young man who's listening to this as well, and you're seeing and connecting with some of these things that I've said, or maybe you're like, man, I have not even had that. I don't have a mentor. Um, sometimes it just starts with being bold and asking, because I didn't get mine just held to me. I actually had someone tell me you should get a mentor. She came up to me and she's like, you don't have a mentor, you need to get a mentor. And it's been life-changing. Seriously. So hopefully get something out of it. I do pray for you. And, as always, God bless. Please leave a comment if you got anything out of this and always take good care. And, we'll welcome in 2025.